The problems we solve are the conversion of archival or library materials into a visual narrative through an exhibit, the representation of items that may not have enough visibility, and the arrangement of physical or online exhibits. I would like to show you an example of a project that I did for the archives of the Montessori School in Italy. There are many branches of the Montessori School across Canada, but I worked on the collections of Maria Montessori and Alice Franchetti, who developed the famous method of education and established the very first school in Italy at the beginning of the 20th century. This was a small part of a larger research project funded by Western University in London, Ontario. My part consisted of developing an exhibit to represent the activity of this school during the first few decades. The material I received to work on included the architectural plan of the space, a huge number of digital photos of archival materials, such as students' notebooks and drawings, photos of the epoch, educative programs, calendars, list of students, letters and postcards of the teachers who traveled abroad, posters, maps, and numerous handwritten notebooks that formed the most important part of the collection, as they represented the method of the school itself. I also received a story, narrated to me during a few online sessions, with some research data about the philosophy of education, the history of the school, biographical information, and the structure of the courses. My task was to convert this verbal story into an exhibit. The biggest issue to solve was how to exhibit these textual materials: red notebooks, blue notebooks, subject notebooks, letters, and other handwritten documents which are illegible and which nobody would read at the exhibit. I needed to determine how to put on the stands the verbal explanations of the biography and teaching activity, which are not part of the visual materials, and how to make the structure of the educational program visually clear, so that it would tell the visitors something. As a professional book artist, I completed pretty much the same task when converting literary texts into illustrations, which means not to explain or repeat the text with pictures, but to translate meaning from one medium into another. So this is what I did in order to translate these Montessori school materials into a possibility to be exhibited. First, I arranged and grouped all the materials that I had according to both the thematic subdivision on subjects and the physical space of the location where the exhibit was going to be installed. Then I conceptualized the visual story and its structure. I took a pencil and sketched which photos or postcards or pieces of letters to use and in what order to narrate the story, from the biography of Alice, her work and trips and so on, to the entire structure of the school and its program, which is very complex and includes many layers of education. This is called a formal composition and is meant to conceptualize the ideas of how the materials will be placed on the stands. It was clear for me, and to explain the plan to the other researchers on the project, I converted my schemes and drawings into documents that listed what item to put where and in which order, and so on. I would like to mention a few important points about this stage of work. 1. There can be many ways of interpreting and representing the same materials. Like illustrating a book, there is no single solution. So my goal for an exhibit is to lead the visitors through it, to create an itinerary between the stands of the exhibit that would invite visitors to go from one point to another to discover the entire story. 2. There should be a logical correlation between the stands and a coherent correlation between small elements within each large section. Each section consists of a few stands and narrates a part of the whole story. 3. There should be elements that indicate the beginning of each section, where it continues and when it ends. Such elements consist of graphical symbols that guide the visitor's eyes in a specific direction. 4. There should be a very tight selection, but with great offerings. We cannot put everything in the exhibit. Less is better. But the materials chosen should present the story with clarity. We need not to assume that the visitors will look at things as we do, because they did not study the history of the school, did not do the research work, did not read the same materials, and they will not pay attention to each single stand, but stop at some of the points. Those points will be different for each visitor. So, after much consideration, I found the solution of how to arrange the educational program of the school visually. The scheme of the space looked like this. In the center of each room, I placed the stands that represent the program of the school: the calendar, the journals of Alice, class registers, diaries, books, records of trips, and so on. Around the perimeter of the room, I placed the stands presenting all the subjects taught in the classes: biology, human body, experiments, geography, the soil and plants, and so forth. Then I linked the stands at the center of the room, representing the program of the school, with the subjects placed around. Through such linking elements, the visitors could proceed from one point to another. This is what the entire structure of the exhibit looked like. But when I started to work on each single stand, I still had to solve the problem of how to represent the large amount of handwritten notebooks, letters, and other textual materials visually. So I selected fragments from the handwritten pages, some sentences and beautiful paragraphs that are particularly expressive and illustrate the structure of the school. I enlarged them in order to put them on the stands and to present this verbal data visually. For this, I used data visualization practices and principles. What allowed me to create a design thinking framework and to build intentional narratives is a well-balanced combination of handwritten calligraphy that represents the visual expressiveness and style of the epoch, with typed texts that provide some explanations about the school, and with student work that presents the outcomes of this method of education. Then I designed the invitation card and posters for the exhibit in a style that corresponds to the style of the early 20th century posters and newspapers. Once the exhibit is over, these materials will need to be converted into a printed catalog. Take a look at the section on digital imprinted catalogs for some examples. With a background and work experience in graphic arts for publishing and a degree in library science, I am also doing design and full pre-press preparation of catalogs of the archival or library collections, which contain the descriptive and visual representations of items. The Montessori School project was done remotely, partially due to COVID-19 because physical trips were impossible. But this totally new experience opened another dimension. We used to think that one should be present physically when working even on an online exhibit, but this is exactly the opposite. A physical exhibit can be planned and designed online, at least the greatest part that involves all the preparatory work that comes before the actual installation. This preparatory work forms the major portion of the exhibit planning. The installation is the shortest part of the work, and it is the culmination of a few months of work. The entire project can have both physical and digital representation. In the case of a physical exhibit, the way the installation is done will depend on factors such as the space and stands available, lighting that can highlight or break the objects, budget management, human resources, and so forth. In the case of an online exhibit, the same preparatory materials are transformed into a series of digital files that lead the viewer through the history of the Montessori school. A physical exhibit occurs in a specific place and time, while an online exhibit is a trace that remains permanently online to present the collection. To conclude with this presentation, I would like to mention that each exhibit will have different approaches and different solutions, depending on the kind of materials, resources, needs, and goals. I hope you have enjoyed seeing this project, and I invite you to contact us to discuss how we can help you to convert your collection into an exhibit.